speaker is a critically acclaimed actress and the first openly transgender actress to be nominated for an Emmy Award. Can we give her a round of applause? The Netflix series and my favorite show, Orange is the New Black. But beyond being an incredibly talented actress, she's also a fierce and passionate advocate for equality. And her success has been an inspiration to trans women, women of color, and LGBT people, and anyone who cares about fairness and equality all across the country and all across the globe. So please give a very warm welcome to Laverne Cox.
Thank you, Gautum, for that lovely introduction. Please make some noise for Gautum. How are you feeling today? Chicago, how are you feeling today? I'm so happy to be back here in Chicago, and I feel so blessed. I feel so very, very blessed today to stand before you, a proud African-American transgender woman. Class background, raised by a single mother, I stand before you an artist, an actress, a sister, and a daughter, and I am living my dreams in America. And that, I could just say that one more time, I am Black. Raised by a single mother, living my dreams in America. I'm gagging right now just thinking about that. But it's so important for me every day to remember that just because I was on the cover of Time magazine, it does not mean that I have overcome. It does not mean that transgender people have overcome in this nation. Just because I was on the cover of Essence magazine, and nominated for an Emmy, it does not mean that we have overcome transgender people. We are, in fact, in a state of emergency. It is a state of emergency for far too many transgender people across this nation. According to the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Projects, over 72% of all LGBTQ homicides are transgender women. Over 67% of those homicides last year in 2013 were trans women of color. The unemployment rate in the transgender community is twice the national average, 4 times that for trans women of color. Transgender people are 4 times more likely than the rest of the population to have a yearly income of less than $10,000 a year. 16% of the transgender population has experienced incarceration compared to the rest of the population. 78% of all students in grades K through 12 who express a transgender or gender non-conforming identity experience harassment or bullying. That sounds like a state of emergency to me for far too many trans and gender non-conforming people around the country. And when I think about what we need to do, what we're missing, and despite, I've had the distinct pleasure to be able to travel all over the country and talk to a lot of different folks, and there's all these conversations across the nation, LGBT organizations and colleges and universities about what's next after marriage. And a lot of folks are saying transgender is next after marriage, and I can't help but think. I can't help but think about folks like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson and Ms. Major who were present at the Stonewall riots in 1969. I can't help but think of what happened at the Compton cafeteria riots 3 years before that. And I think that we're transgender people, we're now getting around to transgender people when it's transgender people who are at the forefront of starting our modern LGBT civil rights movement. To me about that. So I also have the distinct pleasure of being able to talk to trans folks who are working in organizations all over this country, and so much of what I hear from them is a frustration about what it means to work in LGBT organizations as trans people, and particularly as trans people of color. My dear sister, Lord Ashley Hunter from the Trans Women of Color Coalition in New York City, she tells us very boldly that if you are at an LGBT organization and you do not have a trans woman of color in positions of power, you are part of the problem. But as I talk to more and more people, I begin to wonder, what are we missing? What are we missing? And the piece is like, we have to have seats at the table, and we have to have a voice. Far too often, I think, in our LGBT movement, we're missing certain things. And I always like to introduce myself and talk about my intersectional identities. I'm not just a trans person, I'm also a woman, and I'm also a person of color, and I also come from a working class background. And all of those forces have operated in my life to affect how I can live and go about living my dream. I got the distinct pleasure of sharing a stage with my feminist idol last week, a woman by the name of Laverne Cox. We got to share the stage at a new school in New York City, and as many of you know, Laverne Cox coined the amazing phrase, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. It's a mouthful, right? Imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. She coined that phrase over 25 years ago as a way to analyze and understand the ways in which these forces, these structural forces work to oppress us, and how they work with each other and how they are connected. I've added to that cis-normative, heteronormative, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. And think about the struggles that we're facing in the LGBTQ community. What I always come back to is that phrase, cis-normative, heteronormative, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. And the reason I come back to that, because so often, so much of what Bell Hooks talks about in her work is that we have to be constantly critically vigilant about where we are located, how we might be implicit with these interlocking systems of oppression in the ways in which we do this work. Have we, each of us, interrogated our relationship to white supremacy, to institutional racism when we go about doing this work? My dear friend Janet Mock, who some of you know, we were going up to Albany, and about April, I think it was, of 2013. We were on the train, and she was giving a speech that day. And we were talking about race, and Janet looked at me and she said, Laverne, you speak so eloquently about race, yet publicly you never really talk about it. It was a read. She cited articles I had written for Huffington Post and speeches I had made, and I was like, okay, this girl is reading me. And then I had to have a moment. I had to take a moment with myself and be critically vigilant about why is that. I read my bell books, I know about intersectionality. Why am I not talking about race? And honestly, a lot of it had to do with the fact that I, as a black transgender woman from a working class background, raised by a single mother, that's enough. That's enough. And I understand, because I have been acculturated in cis-normative, heteronormative, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, and I understand that a lot of people do not want to talk about race in America. And the second you talk about race in America, people are, she's talking about race, and it's a great way to silence people. It's a great way to silence people of color. And so I had to be critical with myself, and now I'm talking about race, and it scares me. It scares me to stand up as an actress on a mainstream television show, hoping to continue to have a mainstream career, and to stand up in a room full of people and use the phrase cis-normative, heteronormative, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. But if we are serious, if I am serious about ending these systemic oppressions, I have to use that phrase, and I have to talk about this. So I'm so excited to hear what my colleagues have to say today. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to them, and I just want us all to think about how each and every one of us can be critically vigilant as we step forward in our lives and in this work to interrogate our own relationship to these systems of domination. Well, actually, I want to say that for me, shame has been a huge part of my life and my story. And Brené Brown defines shame as the intensely painful belief that we are unworthy of love and belonging. She distinguishes between guilt and shame. She says that guilt is I did something wrong, and shame is I am wrong. And I connect that, and in the spiritual work to build shame resilience, I connect that to the political work of being critical about my relationship to cis-normative, heteronormative, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchy, and how I've internalized those political forces. And so much of my work is to fight against that when I look in the mirror as a black woman, as a trans woman, so that I do not carry that with me and allow that to inform the ways in which I do my work. So I want to leave you with a sense of worthiness to be here, because I think so often the work of these systems of domination is to make us feel that we are not worthy, that we are not worthy to step forward and have our voices be heard, and each and every one of you is worthy today. Thank you so much.